many wonderful people in this room. And we are here for the CSW70 session. And I would like to welcome you all to this panel discussion entitled Ensuring Women's Access to Justice and Addressing Structural Barriers. This panel discussion is organized by the Journalists and Writers Foundation in collaboration with the New York City Bar Association's UN Committee at the Church Center here in New York, right across the United Nations, and welcome. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Mehmet Kilic. I'm humbled to serve as the president of the Journalists and Writers Foundation, which is an NGO based in New York. We are dedicated to the culture of peace, human rights, and sustainable development. We are registered as a nonprofit organization in New York, and we are also proud to be associated with the UN Department of Global Communications. The JWF is dedicated to women's empowerment and girls' education. We have actively participated in the CSW for the last 14 years, since 2013. And our goal is to mobilize civil society organizations from different parts of the world to come to New York to engage with the world. And also it is important to support the gender-sensitive implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This year, we are proud to co-organize 12 panel discussions in collaboration with 22 NGOs from 9 countries. And please let's give a round of applause to our global partners who are over here. Today, ahead of us, we have a very important panel discussion ahead of us, which will focus on women's access to justice. And our distinguished panelists will discuss structural barriers to access justice and legal systems with some case studies. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Professor Sophia Murashkovsky. As a human rights lawyer with over 20 years of experience, Professor Murashkovsky has worked on issues ranging from minority and women's rights to refugee crisis, Ukrainian displacement, and indigenous rights. She has served on the New York City Bar Association's International Human Rights Committee, leading projects on racial justice, police brutality, and health disparities during COVID-19. Currently, she is the chair of the UN Committee of the New York Bar Association. She also sits on its Council for International Affairs and is active in European affairs and Ukraine initiatives. Professor Murashkovsky graduated from Tisch School of the Arts, holds a PhD in philology from Maxim Gorky Literature Institute, and a Master's of Laws from the Fordham University School of Law, where she majored in international human rights law and racial justice. She has so much to talk, but just one more glimpse besides her being a lawyer. As a playwright, screenwriter, theater and film director, international human rights attorney, and a professor at a university, Dr. Sophia is the author of 16 stage plays, produced off-Broadway and off-Broadway. Let's give a round of applause. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sophia Murashkovsky.
Hello, good morning, and thank you, Mehmet, for that introduction. I'm also just a human being and really humbled to be here in such good company. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and honored guests. Welcome to this high-level panel on dismantling structural barriers and advancing inclusive legal systems. We gather here at the United Nations because we recognize a hard truth. Laws on paper do not always translate to justice in practice. For the marginalized, the displaced, the survivor, the person with a disability, or the woman navigating a system not built with her in mind, the walk to justice remains long and fraught with obstacles and many hindrances. We gather here today because we recognize a hard truth, and it is in fact a very hard truth. We are joined by 4 visionary leaders who are going to express their thoughts about all of these hard truths and who have dedicated their lives to shortening that walk. They represent the full spectrum of the justice system, from the highest courts and cabinet ministries to the front lines of international advocacy and grassroots empowerment. It is an honor to be with all of you during such a significant week as we gather here for the Commission on the Status of Women, and March 8th marked International Women's Day. We are not simply reflecting on the strides of progress achieved since the Beijing Declaration. We are looking forward to the systemic shifts still necessary to attain true gender parity and fight for gender equality. The Journalists and Writers Foundation and the UN Committee of the New York City Bar Association have joined forces on this momentous morning because we believe that the human tales which we recount and the data we share on the catalysts for global change are very, very important to discuss. So today we are joined by an extraordinary group, as I said, of experts who are on the front lines of this advocacy, policy, and journalism. Our goal is to move beyond the what and to deep dive into the how. How can we bridge the remaining gaps in women's rights and representation? So I don't know, should I read about the panelists? Or let me, before I go on, let me just guide the conversation a little bit more. So excellencies, colleagues, sisters, and allies, let us not pretend that we came here to trade well-behaved sentences. We did not travel to the 17th session of the Commission on the Status of Women to admire the architecture of our language while the foundations of our world crack. We came here because the ground is shifting under our feet. We came because the room tilts when women stand or when women sit. We came because the house is on fire. For the first time in more than a generation, the map is darkening. Autocracy multiplies. Democratic space thins like old paper. The rule of law does not disappear with ceremony. It recedes as a murmur, a shrug, a backlog, a door left unopened just a little too long. It is first withdrawn from the woman in the courtroom who is told her wound is not yet evidence. It is withdrawn from the journalist at the border whose lens is confiscated before her story can be born. It is withdrawn from the defender whose name is fed to a machine and returned as jeopardy. We are living inside an autocracy pandemic, and its most reliable symptom is the systemic erasure of women's access to justice on the street, on the screen, and in the very institutions summoned to protect us. We have learned not to confuse ink with outcome. We have read the retrospectives that list reform like constellations in the sky, and we honor every struggle behind those lines. But we carry the stubborn arithmetic that refuses to be charmed by prose. A woman can live in a capital with an exceptional statute and still have no way to reach a courthouse without pawning the week's food. That's a horrifying statement I just made. A beautifully phrased protection without a judge who is independent, without a clerk who is trained, without a budget that is real, is simply a ceremonial veil. A law without an independent judiciary is a suggestion. A right without a remedy is a rumor. Protection without resources is theater, and I know about theater. There is a new choreography of silencing that we are experiencing, my friends. And it targets the public woman. It targets the public woman, not the private one. It begins not with a cell, but with a profile page. It weaponizes defamation and insult lawsuits to bury women, journalists, in procedures they cannot afford. It floods a judge's name with deep fakes so that truth looks counterfeit and lies appear plausible. It hounds a human rights defender from platform to platform until she is cornered, hounded like an animal in her own life. This is not debate. It is deference, not controversy, but coercion. An autocracy cannot survive an independent woman with a gavel, so she is smeared. An autocracy cannot survive a woman who will not lie, so she was sued. An autocracy cannot survive a woman who speaks to the world, so the world is turned against her with algorithms and bile. Long before the smear and the lawsuit, there is a quieter battlefield, the daily architecture that excludes without saying its own name. Justice for too many women is luxurious merchandise. Justice is the train fare she did not have to reach the city. Justice is the child care missing from the 8-hour wait to file our one fragile piece of paper. Justice is the language that becomes a weapon when the judge speaks and she cannot follow. Justice is a door that seems open but is not designed for anyone who cannot pay, cannot read, or cannot risk the retaliation that too often follows this filing. I stand here, I sit here, on behalf of the United Nations Committee of the New York City Bar. I've been in this position now for 4 years, and I stand here as a practitioner who has worked alongside women whose lives are balanced on the thin strand between promise and practice. Women displaced by war and poverty, women who I represent, women who hold their children's hand with one hand and their case files with the other. I have watched this thread hold. I have watched it fail. I have learned that our task is not to draft more eloquently. It is to deliver more faithfully, lest women teeter on a tightrope about to snap. So let us say it plainly. This cannot be another year of awareness. The world's women are already exquisitely aware. They are waiting for a remedy. They are waiting for enforcement. They are waiting for budgets that are to arrive on time, for courts that open their doors to those who have never felt welcome, for safety that does not evaporate the moment a case number is assigned. Let this be the time when promises become deadlines. Let this be the time when applause is withheld until delivery is visible. Let this be the hour when we start measuring courage and outcomes. Because the purpose of an opening is to open. I will now invite us into this conversation. Not a parade of positions, but a search for hinges that turn. I will ask questions that do not permit abstraction, and I will return for clarity when answers are drift. So I invite my panelists to answer not only as experts, but as the witnesses to what can change tomorrow morning as we sit here today. Because what we build here will leave this room. It will. Our summary here will reach every permanent mission and every UN agency that claims custody of justice. Let them feel our attention. Let them fully and wholeheartedly heed that we have stopped asking for permission to be equal, because equality is not a favor to be granted to us. It is a fact to be honored for us. So let me say, the house is on fire, but we are not powerless. We have water. We have faith, we have stamina, and we have integrity. Let our work be that water. Let it reach the woman at the margin first. Let it not evaporate in the heat of rhetoric. Let it run, visible and cold, through every corridor where justice has been withheld from us. So now let us begin by turning to these esteemed practitioners here who live inside our institutions, and let us become familiar with their individual plight. Very elongated bios, and should I read them all, or may I?
No.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So it is my distinct honor to introduce our first panelist, and I'm sorry to go into it, but the Honorable Judge Melissa Benavides Víquez. Víquez. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing. As the head of the Access to Justice Unit for the Judiciary of Costa Rica, Judge Víquez is a pioneer in ensuring that the rule of law is truly universal. Her work on the rights of indigenous peoples, the LGBTQ+ community, and persons with disabilities is setting a gold standard for judicial inclusivity in Latin America. Joining her is Professor Margaret Kobia, a former cabinet minister in Kenya and current chancellor of St. Paul's University. Professor Kobia is a titan of public service. Her career is a masterclass in how institutional leadership can be used to champion the sustainable development goals and dismantle the structural barriers that have historically sidelined women in governance. Our third panelist is Andrea Barron. As the Advocacy and Outreach Program Manager for Task International, Andrea is the bridge between the silenced and the powerful. From the halls of the United States Congress to observing trials in Istanbul and launching critical projects for refugees in East Africa, she ensures that the voices of torture survivors dictate the human rights agenda. And finally, we have my dear colleague who works with me at for the United Nations Committee. We welcome Evelyn Dalmacy, Esquire, the founder of the International Caribbean Women Alliance. Ms. Dalmacy is a distinguished attorney and mediator whose work embodies the spirit of our host city, New York. As a recipient of the 2026 EPIC Award for Justice and Advocacy, she has spent her career ensuring that immigrant women and the underserved communities possess the legal autonomy they deserve. Thank you. Those are our panelists. Alrighty, so let's begin. So ladies and gentlemen and esteemed guests, we are not here merely to discuss the law, but to discuss justice, as I mentioned in my preliminary speech. Judge Víquez, I would like to begin with you in your capacity with the Costa Rican Supreme Court. You often speak of open justice. How do we ensure that a judiciary does not merely apply the law, but actively reaches out to those the law has historically ignored?
Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and dear friends, I extend to you all a warm and heartfelt greeting. It is truly an honor to stand before you and to share this space with remarkable women whose intellectual contribution and long-standing commitment to human rights inspire us all. The title of my presentation is The Architecture of Democracy, Legal Strategies for the Empowerment of Women. Now, I could begin right away with the proposals I bring to you today. Yet before doing so, I felt compelled to pause and reflect on a present matter, the profound challenges democracy is facing in our time, and how, little by little, it is ceasing to be seen as a viable option by many within the younger generation. For years, as a lawyer and university professor, I thought that democracy was the bedrock upon which human rights, dissent, and the rule of law firmly rested. I believed my students understood this truth because they had been born and raised in democratic societies. But today, I see cracks in that foundation. Democracy is no longer perceived as a legitimate option. It is seen instead as a system that fails to deliver equality, justice, and true representation. I wish to put forward two guiding questions. First, are we witnessing democratic discontent? Or more dangerously, are we facing discontent with democracy itself? The first speaks to a loss of trust and institution, when political decisions fall short of their promise of equity. The second goes further. It questions democracy itself, blaming it for inequalities, violence, and exclusion. Let me begin with democratic discontent, a global phenomenon marked by citizens' growing mistrust in democratic institutions. People feel unrepresented, unheard, and unseen in political decisions that should embody justice, equality, and fairness. Faced with this reality, young people and society at large find little incentive to participate in electoral process, leaving the future of a nation in the hands of a few. One clear manifestation of this discontent is electoral abstention. Allow me to illustrate with the case of my country, of Costa Rica. In 2022, abstention reached unprecedented levels in recent history, over 30% in the first round and nearly 44% in the second. The highest abstention was among young people aged 18 to 25. By 2026, abstention has dropped to 30%, signaling a recovery in electoral participation. Interestingly, young abstention decreased slightly, while older voters became the group least likely to cast their ballots. According to a study conducted by University of Costa Rica and Supreme Electoral Tribunal, some of the causes of abstention are clear: distrust in political parties, disillusionment with politics, lack of ideological identification, and shared disinterest or apathy. When a significant group of citizens felt unrepresented, a crisis of trust emerged, one that erodes the social pact and undermines faith in democracy. This opened dangerous doors to populist, anti-system, and extremist movements. But let us ask, what effect does democracy discontent have on women? When apathy toward democracy grows, so too does apathy toward the institution of the state. Democracy discontent directly impacts women's access to justice. When checks and balances weaken, when the judiciary is discredited, and often happen under authoritarian governments, structural barriers harden gender bias in ruling, lack of female representation in courts, and multiple forms of violence. This undermines the effectiveness of law as means to resolving conflict and the legitimacy of justice itself. In preparation for today, I revisited Virginia Woolf's transformative work, A Room of One's Own. Her central idea remains powerful. Women must have money and a room of their own to create. Autonomy requires both resources and space. Yet neither will suffice if the broader environment fails to recognize and nurture that autonomy. Discontent with democracy, on the other hand, manifests as apathy toward elected officials. Those who, from position of power, perpetuate gender violence, misdistribution of wealth, autocratic movements, radicalization of opinions, wars, and restriction on freedom of expression. Let me be clear, I stand firmly in favor of democracy, but that does not prevent me from listening with concern to voices that call for greater concentration of power, that dismiss human rights as an indulgence, that silent dissent, or that excuse corruption. These discourses are often heard from public offices, even in nations that claim to be democratic. Listening carefully matters, because only then can we respond with conviction and demonstrate that democracy is not a luxury, but the indispensable condition for human rights to flourish. Now, in the second part of my address, I turn to the task entrusted to me. I begin by affirming that legal advocacy, policy change, and the creation of empowering environment are indeed agents of situational change. Yet they are also shaped by politics, economics, culture, and the attitude of society. We cannot advocate if our voices are silent. We cannot build empowerment if the environment remains hostile to us. Spanish philosopher Amelia Valcárcel speaks of a feminist civilization, an universalist, less violent, highly educated, and expressive. She proposes that democracy and feminism must forge new relationships yet to be fully realized. To change laws, we must first change the masculine archetype upon which they were built. As jurist Alda Facio reminds us, laws were designed by men and their own image. This explains why their effects fall differently on women and men. With this in mind, I present 6 proposals. First, a democracy with a woman is not a democracy at all. Women must be visible in decisions that affect citizenship. True representation must be intersectional. Review discriminatory laws and audit legal frameworks to identify norms that perpetuate gender bias. Costa Rica Judicial Branch already has the Gender Technical Secretariat and an Access to Justice unit to identify obstacles with the intersectional lens. Gender quotas in the jurisdictional ensure women's representation not only as a professional, but as a decision maker. For example, parity in judicial appointments across offices. Gender-focused indicators provide a realistic panorama for informed decision-making. Costa Rica's Gender Violence Observatory and Statistics Department democratize data to guide institutional and societal decisions. Education on violence against women equips judicial actors with skills to apply justice through a gender lens. Costa Rica mandates gender perspective in all training, tracking participation by men and women annually. 2. Gender perspective must be recognized as a general principle of law. This allows us to measure and understand this differentiated effect of norms. It requires rethinking legal education, jurisprudence, and sources of law. Costa Rica already trains judges to apply protective framework for women when necessary. 3. Constitutions must integrate gender perspective. Just as a democracy-organized society, so too much gender equality. Budgets, education, health, justice, labor, and other constitutional mandates must reflect the social composition they protect. 4. Digital justice with gender perspective. Build secure, accessible systems that bridge the digital divide and connect generations. Online reporting must be simple with strong protection against digital violence. Examples include itinerant justice for rural women or those with disabilities, and AI tools designed with gender perspective. 5. Strengthening international coalitions. Global networks that defend women's rights and access to justice are vital, yet they face threats. Attacks on defenders, defunding, digital violence, and reprisals. These organizations are part of the democratic fabric, preventing impunity and safeguarding fundamental rights. Costa Rica is developing a gender-sensitive protection protocol for human rights defenders. 6. Creating empowering environments. We must rebuild youth confidence in democracy. Intergenerational coalitions, open listening, and inclusive participation are key. Gender perspective in academic curricula ensures new generations grow close to these issues. Technology can connect, validate, and adapt democratic formulas to future needs. Democracy is not a gift we inherit. It is a flame we must keep alive. And that flame burns brightest when women's voices rise to sustain it. Let us carry forward that light so that equality, justice, and freedom might never fade. And so, I close with the words of writer Almudena Grandes. Democracy is also measured by the voices of the woman who sustained it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished organizers, panelists, the media. Let me also recognize Harmony Institute, which made the effort for me to be here as a partner, and my colleagues, all of us here. Where do I start? I am a practitioner. I worked in senior government offices, and I just want to talk about my experience. Not because I think we are here, not because we don't know the reasons, but we want to think how can we be able to make a difference. Therefore, in my reflection as a civil servant, and the area of gender equality, I've really seen that for us really to get sustainable development, I have concluded we have to get gender equality. Unless we get the gender equality, sustainable development doesn't mean anything, because it means almost 50% of the people are left behind. As I was growing up in my career, many times I asked, and I was also asked, have you ever faced a situation where you are legal? And I'm asking you that. Have you ever faced a situation where you are legal rights? have been violated, all of us here. And in most of the rooms, most people say yes, either at home, at the community, or at the place of work. But what is very interesting, most of us either choose to do nothing about it. That you can see there is discrimination right at home. Maybe a boy is treated differently, a girl is treated differently, but we will not raise our voice and ask why. The most important thing, in my view, it is the danger or the harm it does to a woman. When you are violated and you do nothing about it, one, you feel very discouraged, you feel violated, you lose confidence, and when you lose confidence, then you cannot champion many other woman activities that will make a difference. Therefore, it is very important that whenever we are feeling offended or violated, how do we hold people accountable? Because it's an accountability matter. In Kenya, we have a very progressive constitution, 2010, where there is a Bill of Rights, there is equal access to justice, but that remains sometimes just on the paper. There are many other problems that we face. And from my experience, we realize that there are socio-cultural challenges, there are economic barriers, and also there are institutional inefficiencies within our justice system. Some of them have just come through here. I'm trying not to repeat. In that case, when it comes to social barriers or negative norms, I think the society and the literature actually shows that patriarchy has constructed men as superior and the women as subordinate. That's how the society in most, especially in Africa. Then with that construction, I believe that if it was constructed that way, we can deconstruct. Does that make sense? If it was constructed that, we can deconstruct. So negative cultural norms that discriminate against women, I'm arguing that access to justice is one way of dismantling negative social norms. So it is very important, in case we never thought that way. Unless we access justice, we can also dismantle negative social norms. Because when one gets justice, then the others are able to see that even if I was discriminated, maybe I was not promoted within the time I was supposed to be promoted in my organization. Somebody went and sought justice and they were promoted. Therefore, I can do it. So that's how I look at it. When it comes to economic barriers, I think they have been mentioned by my panelists here that most of the people do not get access to justice because the legal fees, and especially when people do not have jobs, and even if they have the jobs, there are other priorities in the family. Then you realize transport or access to the court. If I needed to go to my court, maybe in some African countries, I would have to do 10 kilometers. That costs money. That can make you not access justices. Other times we do not seem to understand the documentation. Trying to get a documentation through a lawyer that you can be able to use in the court sometimes can be very, very expensive. Therefore, I want us to start looking at, is there a relationship between poverty and access to justice? Is there any relationship between economic empowerment and access to justice? We must have that as an argument. Therefore, in the institution also, we carried one case study in the line of land and governance. And within land and governance, we found that in Kenya, only 1% of women own land with a title. 1%. 5% own a title jointly with their spouses. So you can imagine what does that mean to a woman when you are working on the land, and it doesn't belong to you, which means you also have no say the produce you get from that land. At the same time, you cannot also use this land maybe even to secure a loan. Therefore, the situation that land itself, how it can promote women to getting voice and power, you realize then they are denied in that case. So what did the women tell us? Because every time we are talking to women, if you want to know about women, ask women. Don't ask other people. But I also appreciate, this is not a fight between men and women. It's a collaboration between men and the women to get to gender equal, for not just for the purpose. Gender equality, in my view, I've always argued, is not an end to itself, but it's a bigger purpose, an equal, better future for all of us. Therefore, if we understand that way, it will not be women versus men, because we lose. But if you use men as allies, I think you make some progress. The case study we did, we found that women and land governance, women who go to court are very, very few. 30%, remember the question I asked you, have you ever been violated? And we say, almost all of us normally would say yes, but how many people go to court? Only 30% of cases in court in Kenya today are taken there by women. So you can tell, see, 70% perhaps is by men, and the 30% is by women. What did the women tell us? They told us that when they take their matters to court, one of the problems that they face is those against socio-cultural norms, to the extent that even when they have been awarded a case to own land and the transfer is in their own name, then the male in-laws, the other relatives, they will tend to tell them, no, you shouldn't have done that, because when you land here is only supposed to be owned by men. To the extent of being asked, since you can you wait for your son to grow so that you can register his land in the name of your son, because of those same socio-cultural practices that we talked. Then another one mentioned that she was a widow and she needed to have the land registered in her name, and the chief is an administrator within a certain region. The chief said, no, I don't want to interfere with your matter because that is disturbing cultural practices. So this is a duty bearer who is supposed to help you. But from this experience, they are saying that they can't do it because they are fearing to disturb those social problems. Therefore, we find issues to do with land, property ownership, and the sexual and the gender-based violence are the one with the most access, lack of access of justice. We must ask ourselves, then when we are treating thematic areas in gender, are there some areas we should concentrate more, especially when it comes to property ownership, land ownership, sexual and gender-based violence? Now, we also found those who go to court are those who have had a certain level of education. Those who have had 8 years level of education tend to be the one going to court, which tells us lifelong learning, education plays a fact, especially to women, to be able to raise their voice, get the agency, and make a case. Therefore, as I conclude, because I don't think I want to spend a lot of time on what is wrong, I should be proceeding to what is right. And I'm just saying the role of education can equip women with skills and abilities to fight for access for justice. Basic education, and I'm sure you all know, gives people a voice because you can argue on a matter. You can also gives you power, or you're able to play power relations, and also you can become an agency. Also increased confidence when people are educated of administrative system, and at the same time they are able to argue with evidence and data. They will be able to say, in this area of ours, only so many percentage are having a title deed. Therefore, the policy and the other people with the duty bearers need to take some notes. Can I say I've seen a difference between slightly older women and the youth? I have hope. Most of the youth people are now able to question, and I'm sure there is a hope if we work with them from maybe the way we want to access justice. But we need to watch out, just as I had that come out. There are also shocks, global shocks, and crises that can set back any progress made towards access to justice. For example, we realized COVID-19, we have difficulties with access to courts. Economic downtimes, we have seen legal aid not get funded. We have also seen climate-related and also digital divide. It's like digital technologies is like underburdened sword that they can cut both ways. It can be used to make women more access to justice, especially when you want to virtual courts. But at the same time, those who do not have the digital knowledge are left behind. So we need to watch around that. Exclusion. Therefore, in conclusion, I just want to say from the experience of land governance dispute in Kajiado, Kenya, it reflects on broader realities. Progressive laws exist, patriarchal enforcement system persists. Therefore, we have always said their commitment to these structural barriers remain, but many of us are bystanders. And this conference focus on the many people who are bystanders as far as injustice is concerned. We just watch and know nothing about it. You can't make progress in that way. I recommend, or I've given about 4, 5.
So, Professor Kobe, I've just been informed that we have to move on. I'm so sorry to cut you short.
That's fine. I'm just concluding.
Thank you.
I'm just saying that I am called to action. Partnership and collaboration and holding each accountable. I said in Kenya, as a minister, we brought together civil society, government, and all other players to think about issues to do with justice and other gender-based capacity building through education. I think that's what we have agreed. Sustainable budgeting and funding must be available, and especially what has worked, and they allow me, moderator, to say this one. We have found for women, when they get collective, especially at the lower level, when they get collective, they find solutions rather than working alone. So as women group, as collective, and they are able to attract maybe even legal aid than when we work alone. I thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's true. We are stronger when we do collaborate and stand for one another. Thank you very much, Professor. And now let's move on to Andrea Barron. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
I'm here today representing the Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition. It's a long name, known as TASC International. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We work with asylum seekers, mostly from Africa, who have been tortured by repressive governments, mainly for political reasons or because they're part of the LGBT community. TASC was founded by Sister Diana Ortiz, a Roman Catholic nun from New Mexico who was raped and brutally tortured by the Guatemalan military in 1989 when the United States was supporting right-wing military dictatorships in Central America. Sister Diana believed that survivors of torture should have a voice in the nation's capital, not just professionals discussing torture, but the survivors themselves speaking for themselves. As advocacy program manager, I help make this happen by training torture survivors to testify in the United States Congress and before State Department officials. I also train survivors outside of Washington, including here in New York City and internationally. And you'll notice that we talk about survivors of torture instead of victims of torture, because we want to focus on how they are survivors. We often hear about the use of rape as a weapon of war. In the 1990s, rape was finally recognized as a war crime and a crime against humanity. However, there has not been enough discussion on how rape has been used as a method of torture by government agents against individual women opposed to their own autocratic government. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because those are the women I work with. These are women I want to tell you about. They have no access to justice, just total impunity for the rapists. Of course, this is not a problem only in Africa, but all over the world, including here in the United States, and we all know how long the Jeffrey Epstein survivors have waited for justice. Both male and female torture survivors at TASC have been severely beaten, placed in solitary confinement, and psychologically intimidated. But for women, rape is also used as an additional method of torture, in addition to being severely beaten, solitary confinement, and psychological intimidation. I want to share the story of a brave woman who lives just a few miles from the United Nations, 30 minutes away from here in Harlem. She comes from Eritrea, a small country in the Horn of Africa which has no elections and no parliament and does not even bother holding phony elections. Thousands of Eritreans trying to escape their country have ended up drowning in the Mediterranean Sea on their way to Europe. This woman was not a dissident. She just happened to be on a plane talking to another Eritrean woman about a boat accident where 300 Eritreans had drowned. Shortly after arriving home, she was arrested. Someone knocked at her door, taken to the police station. A man they called Major, who was an army major, played a tape of her criticizing the government on the plane. Turns out that her seatmate, the so-called nice woman she exchanged information with, was a female spy who recorded everything she said on tape. The major threw her on a table, held a gun to her head, and raped her. He told her not to make a sound if she wanted to stay alive. The assault was extremely painful because she also had been subjected to female genital mutilation, or FGM, very common in Eritrea. No access to justice for her in Eritrea. And part of my job is, I am not a lawyer, but I write affidavits of support for the torture survivors to bolster their case when they apply for asylum. So I get to know them very well. I meet them. I met her twice at this Italian restaurant in Harlem and wrote an affidavit of support for her. And she did get a type of justice when she was granted asylum in the United States, right here in New York City. So the good news is 100% of the torture survivors we work with end up getting granted asylum. The bad news is the reason is they have very strong cases because they were tortured and raped. Strong case, more likely to get asylum. 10 years ago, I met an Ethiopian survivor who got pregnant in prison from a rape. She told the perpetrator, a high-level military officer, that the pregnancy had made her sick and he released her. 9 months later, he showed up at her house and told her mother he wanted to see the baby. Her mother said her daughter had fled the country. The woman was able to secure a U.S. visa and was granted asylum also. FGM, also known as female genital cutting, is a form of torture. I've been working with a courageous Ethiopian woman who became an anti-FGM activist in her country. FGM has been illegal in the Ethiopian Criminal Code since 2004, but prosecution against traditional cutters who make a living off of these girls' families is extremely rare. This woman wanted to stop more little girls from getting cut. She and some other anti-FGM activists demonstrated in front of the federal police station at Addis Ababa, shouting "No to FGM" and calling on the government to arrest and fine the traditional cutters. Instead, the police beat her, threw her to the ground, and arrested her. And she's now here in Washington in the process of applying for asylum. I also heard from one of TAS's local partners about anti-FGM activists from Kenya and the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, who were sexually assaulted by government agents. This part is really horrible to hear. The DRC perpetrators were extraordinarily brutal. They not only raped this woman repeatedly, they burned her flesh with an iron. The imprint of the iron can still be seen on her body years later. I now want to turn to a different part of the world, Turkey. The Turkish justice system is misusing counterterrorism laws to falsely accuse teenage girls, female university students, mothers and grandmothers of terrorism. I visited Istanbul 4 times over the past 18 months as an international human rights observer and sat in on court hearings where 41 defendants, almost all women, were charged with terrorism and trying to overthrow Turkey's constitutional order. On May 7, 2024, the organized crime and counterterrorism branches of the Istanbul Police Department raided a district of Istanbul and arrested the defendants. This trial has become known as the girls' trial because some of the people arrested were teenage girls still in high school. And these are the people I met when I was in Turkey. The Turkish government alleges that they are connected to the Gulen movement, G-U-L-E-N, named after the late Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen. They are committed to a moderate interpretation of Islam, which embraces modernity, education, especially science and math, interfaith dialogue, and community service. The Turkish government claims, without any evidence at all, that Gulen and his followers were behind an attempted coup in Turkey in 2016. Now let me tell you what I observed in the 4 times I went to the Istanbul court. Of course, I don't speak Turkish. I had someone interpreting for me. Very difficult. Wonderful language, very difficult. The presiding judge did not ask the defendants if they had undergone military training, encouraged violence, planted a bomb, or even communicated with anyone about an act of violence, which you would have expected if they were being tried for terrorism. Instead, the judge asked them why they were studying science and math together, why they were reading the Quran, why they were going to iftars during Ramadan, why they went bowling, to the movies, grocery shopping. These normal activities, according to the judge, were, quote, evidence that the defendants were terrorists. These women were all observant Muslims who placed a tremendous value in education. Now, I'm going to tell you about a few that I remember very, very well. One defendant, 52-year-old Aysu Otses Bayram, and of course I have permission to use her name. I didn't use the names for any of the other people because we don't want any retaliation against them, but she's a public person. That's what we do at TASC. Only a very few people we can use their names. She told me that the regime is targeting these particular girls and women because it's afraid of educated women. Why? Quote, educated women ask questions, she said, which goes back to the role of education that everyone is talking about. One of the most memorable stories I heard in Istanbul was from a 25-year-old defendant we can call SN. She was strip-searched down to her underwear when she was arrested, then in prison, forced to remove all her clothes. She testified publicly in court about what we call the total strip search, an incredibly brave thing for a conservative Muslim wearing hijab to do. Her lawyer told me that many other defendants were strip searched, but only SN was willing to tell the judge what happened to her. So she speaks English very well, so I was able to communicate with her directly. I asked her why she did this, and she said, quote, I wanted to make my voice heard so they don't do the same thing to younger girls who would have a much harder time handling this kind of total strip search. Let me add here that no weapon of any kind was ever found on any of the defendants after they were strip searched. The idea was simply to humiliate them. In September 2025, the Istanbul court announced the trial verdict. 19 defendants were acquitted of terrorism and 19 were found guilty of being members of a terrorist group. Aysu Bayram, the 52-year-old woman I mentioned, was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison. She has 4 daughters and a son who now lives in Germany. She's also a liver transplant recipient. She received part of her son's liver and was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Her daughter, Aysa, a law student, was acquitted. Aysa's 10-year-old daughter, the 10-year-old, said she would not cry because she wants to be brave like her mother. On October 8, 2025, a group of UN Special Rapporteurs and UN working groups, including the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, wrote a letter to the Turkish government about the trial verdict, demonstrating Turkey's, quote, misuse of counterterrorism laws against individuals suspected of affiliation with the Gulen movement for activities that had nothing to do with terrorism. Let us hope that to honor the women of Turkey on International Women's Day, Turkey finds a way to acquit Aysu Bayram and the other 18 defendants, almost all women falsely convicted of terrorism. Of course, that's my main hope today, that something that I'm saying today will make a difference in acquitting these women. Terrorism is a real and present danger in the world. But the charge of terrorism has been widely used and misinterpreted to target dissidents and perceived dissidents by the government of Turkey and other undemocratic governments, and of course in countries where there's a democratic backsliding and that still claim to be democracies. I want to conclude by calling on all governments to first envision a world where girls and women do have access to justice, where perpetrators of violence against women no longer have impunity, and second, turn this vision into reality step by step.
so much, Andrea. I just wanted to say that it is true, terrorism is rampant, but it was not only in Guantanamo Bay that we had to use these mechanisms on behalf of our own government such as waterboarding and others that created such issues for us. It's not just Guantanamo. There are terrorists all over the world that create these horrible situations for women. Thank you very much. We're on to Evelyn Del Macy. Please, if you would, present your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sophia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. You've heard from my fellow panelists that democracy is a flame that must be kept alive. And for democracy to be kept alive, women must be present in it. You've also heard about violence perpetrated against women. And that's why access to justice is important. But before I begin, as you can tell, you may be able to tell by my accent, I am an Asian American woman. And I want to send my condolences to Major Squawfly Davius, who just died in Kuwait in the major operations, if you don't want to call it a war, against Iran. So let's say his name, because it has not been reported that he's Haitian American. Once again, Major Squawfly Davius, that's the Haitian pronunciation, Davius. My condolences to his family and loved ones. So today I'm going to focus on the role of justice, of the role of justice systems in advancing inclusive and equitable societies. Of course, many countries, as you heard, legal frameworks protecting women's rights are on the books. They've been expanded significantly. However, one of the major challenges that we face today, that women face, is ensuring that those rights are not only written, but that they are accessible, enforceable, and effective in practice. To understand the importance of inclusive legal systems, it is helpful to begin with the broader global justice landscape. Recent research have shown that approximately 64% of the legal rights of women have approximately 64% of the legal rights available to men. That's globally. At the same time, nearly 2/3 of the world's population lack meaningful access to justice. Globally, approximately 1 in 3 women experience gender-based violence during their lifetime. These figures highlight a fundamental challenge. Legal protections may exist, yet institutions of justice often struggle to deliver real protection. One important insight from recent research is the distinction between legal rights and institutional implementation. Legal frameworks alone are not enough. Effective justice systems require 3 interconnected elements. First, laws must be recognized and rights must be protected. Second, you need supportive institutional systems. That must exist. That includes national policies, legal aid services, and survivor support structures. Third, justice institutions must have the capacity to enforce those rights through courts, law enforcement, and accountability mechanisms. Only when these 3 elements work together can legal rights translate into real protection. For legal rights to equate to real protection, not only do we need an inclusive legal system, it must focus on access to justice. As a Caribbean woman, I'm going to talk from a Caribbean perspective. In the Caribbean, for example, when we speak about access to justice, we are often speaking about a woman who must travel very far to file a complaint, who must decide if losing a work day is even worth the trip, because oftentimes they don't even get justice. You see, missing a work day for these women is lost income for their family. We're also talking about a woman who works in the informal sector without a contract. We are talking about a woman who cannot access the court system because of gang-related violence forcing courts to close in certain countries. When we speak about access to justice, we are talking about a woman who may be undocumented, a migrant, or a stateless person, who must decide between seeking protection that may trigger deportation rather than the remedy that she seeks and deserves. Importantly, undocumented women oftentimes do not report abuse, whether sexual or physical, because they fear removal more than they expect protection, making access to justice extremely challenging. For a legal system to be inclusive and accessible, individuals must be able to reach institutions of justice regardless of income, language, geographic location, or social status. This includes affordable legal representation, accessible court procedures and institutions of justice that are responsive to survivors of violence. Ultimately, inclusion determines who is able to access justice in practice. While inclusion focuses on access, equity focuses on the outcome. A legal system is equitable when it produces fair and consistent results. This includes timely case resolution, transparent procedures, and effective enforcement mechanisms. Equitable legal systems also ensure that vulnerable populations, including women and marginalized communities, receive meaningful protection under the law. Meaningful protection, however, depends on strong and equitable legal system, and that may require in part, a reformation of a country's entire legal system. In considering reforms, we have to look at comparative, models. For example, some countries, I'm not gonna name countries on the panel, but some countries, when it comes to gender-based violence, some of them may have quick orders of protection that women can quickly have access to. And oftentimes, these countries may include access to housing. They may allocate housing in certain circumstances. Other countries, however, may have domestic violence statutes, but there may be no enforcement mechanism. Or if they do have some enforcement mechanism, there could be delays in enforcing them. So we know that protection delayed is protection denied. Caribbean nations need not replicate foreign systems, wholesale, but they can adopt certain innovations that prioritize speed and coordination to strengthen institutional capacity. Just an example. Justice reform, however, I'm going to talk about 3 pillars of justice reform, so I'll be quick not to take too much time. Justice reform requires strengthening 3 interconnected pillars. The first pillar is legal recognition, ensuring that rights are protected through legislation and policy frameworks. The second pillar, and I think one of the most important pillars, is institutional capacity, meaning courts, police, and legal institutions must have the training, the resources, and the coordination necessary to enforce those rights. And the third pillar is accessible justice, ensuring individuals can realistically access the legal system through affordable legal representation, language access, and community support mechanism. When any of these 3 pillars are weak, when any of these 3 pillars is weak, the effectiveness of the justice system is diminished. So when legal protection exists, structural barriers, even when legal protection exists, I know some of my colleagues talk about that, there are often structural barriers that prevent individuals from accessing justice. It's been mentioned here, economic inequality can limit access to legal representation. Court delays, complex court procedures for somebody who's uneducated. It's gonna be hard for you to understand the procedures. It's gonna be hard for you to proceed, to pursue legal remedies. Social stigma. is often a huge barriers to justice. Oftentimes, women fear retaliation, and that will prevent them from, reporting violence. So addressing structural barriers is essential to ensuring that legal systems are inclusive and effective. Several policy strategies, I think, that can help strengthen inclusive justice system, like I had mentioned, expanding legal aid access to them, judicial and law enforcement training on gender-based violence can strengthen institutional responses, digital access to courts can improve case management and can help reduce delays, and coordinated survivor support services can ensure that individuals receive both legal protection and social support. These reforms, I think, can help translate legal commitments into real protection. So justice reform is central to the global development agenda, what we call SDGs. So SDG 5 calls for the elimination of violence against women and the promotion of gender equality. SDG 16 emphasizes access to justice and the development of strong, accountable institutions. Inclusive legal system serves as the bridge between these two goals. By strengthening courts, expand legal aid, and ensuring gender-responsive justice system, we strengthen both gender equality and the rule of law. To conclude, promoting inclusive and equitable legal system requires 4 essential elements: strong legal frameworks, effective institutions, accessible justice mechanism, and accountability. We have to hold people accountable. When we do that, by extension, we bridge the gap between SDG 5 and 16. In closing, let us remind ourselves that the strength of a legal system is not measured by rights written in law, but by whether those rights translate into real protection. When we say real protection, we mean accessible and equitable. For the people who depend on them, that's why we need real protection, not just on the books, but in reality. So with that, I thank you all. Thank you so much.
Dramatic lullabies, and in turn, this transforms the only honest word that we have left. So make no mistake about it. We as women need to be safeguarded. We have the strength. We have the strength. Believe me. So please now let me turn to the questions that I have prepared. I would like to ask the following of the judge, please, of Melissa. Thank you. Allow me to pose a question on intersectionality in family law. Given that your background as a family court judge, what are the most persistent, invisible barriers that prevent women and sexual minorities from seeking protection within the domestic legal system?
Thank you very much. I believe the colleague here mentioned it, that sometimes women feel ashamed to go to court and say that they are victims of domestic violence, And it is hard because also they're not trained or informed about the types of violence that there is. I mean, we could be familiar with the physical, but there are many other forms of violence, economical, and physically, and psychically, and vicarian, yeah, and many others. So sometimes the culture passes these kinds of structures. So we are not trained to see that we are being a victim, Or sometimes we said, like, because I hit you back, you're not a victim. You're not supposed to defend from your husband or defend from your partner. You're supposed to be safe and to be happy and so. And I think one of the good practices that we have in the domestic violence area is that the judge can go to the victim. I mean, a neighbor can go and say, this woman is being abused, so the judge can go to the house and take the testimony. And not only that, the judge must seek about tracking the case. So you have to go and call in time to time, every month or every week, depending on how difficult the case is, and ask, how are you doing? And if she says something, alarming, we or the judges have to go immediately with the police and do something about it. So I think about that is not only that we expect the victims to come, but the justice branch should go to the victims and protect them.
Thank you very much, Judge. Thank you for that response. Just in moving forward, let's try to fortunately curtail our answers just to keep in mind with the time. Thank you very much. So I wish to focus on structured barriers and public service leadership, and with that I turn to Professor Sophia on the global standards. From your perspective, Professor, on the UN from the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration, which you serve on, what can the UN accomplish better and to support member states in addressing the structural barriers that keep women out of senior management and governance?
Thank you. I'll try to say that the 11 principles of governance, effective governance, that were developed by Committee of Experts of Public Administration are very, very critical. But they can only be critical if people are made aware, people in the public service need to be aware. And even after you have learned there's 11 principles of good governance, then we also need to put an accountability mechanism in terms of measuring progress, because many times we could be talking, but nobody can place a finger on where we are, where is the data that is pointing. And I think in public service, there's a tendency to work in silos. Government is working alone, civil society is alone, the media is working alone. How can we come together and be able to address with the data those particular questions? So I think I will stop here because I think of time.
Thank you very much.
But I also wanted to add one more. Political goodwill, from my perspective, working in the politician, whatever effort we have, we must find how do we get political goodwill to support our effort. And like when we are having International Women's Day, I think I use this as an opportunity to bring all senior level leaders and also the president, so that he can also see what is innate for him, so that he can support efforts on gender equality, including advocating and supporting budget.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for your response. I want to turn to Andrea. I wish to shift the focus to address human rights advocacy and victim testimony, which is what you've addressed in, beforehand. So I'd like to speak on the power of testimony. Andrea, you prepared torture survivors, an incredibly difficult endeavor, to testify before the US Congress and the State Department. What is the psychological and political impact of bringing lived experience directly into the halls of power, and how does this change the public conversation, in your opinion?
So it makes a huge difference. We're a very small organization, and as I said, we're the only one that actually trains the survivors themselves. And there's two achievements. One is that they feel much better about themselves, that they can go in. We usually meet with aides, sometimes we meet with actual members and State Department officials, and they feel very proud of themselves that they were able to explain what happened to them in an important place like the US Congress. So that is a huge accomplishment. And we have made, we haven't had a lot of victories, but we've had some legislative victories simply because members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, were impacted by the human stories. So that, I do some of the broader advocacy myself, but the only reason we've had any victories at all is because of the survivors themselves. And also, we are a survivor-led organization. The director of task is always a survivor of torture. The current director is a survivor from Sudan. And so that permeates everything that we do.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now I turn to Evelyn. Evelyn, I would like to let us now focus on community empowerment. and equitable legal systems. And in that vein, I'd like to ask on your immigration journey, if you can reflect. Drawing on your journey from Haiti to being a leader in the New York legal community, what is the one systemic change that would most benefit immigrant women seeking to enter the legal or professional workforce in the West, in your opinion, and from your experience?
I'm so sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. Drawing on your own journey from Haiti to being a leader in the New York legal community, what is the one systemic change that would most benefit immigrant women, right, seeking to enter the legal profession or workforce in the West?
The systemic change. So based on my perspective, the one thing that I can see, I guess, support. We all need to be supported, whether, being able to access money to go to school or being able to get support from your community, your family. I don't know if that answers the question, but for me, support was key, for me to be here, to be in that space.
Wonderful. Thank you
Okay.
so much. Thank you. And before I close, I'm not sure that we'll get to audience questions, but before I close, I have a really short closing remark. But before I do that, I just want to ask each one of you just one, and you can just answer it really, really briefly. If you could implement one universal policy change tomorrow to ensure that women have access to justice, and that is no longer dependent on a person's geography or status, what would that single change be? If you could implement one thing to change, any one of you can answer. Who has the mic?
I'm gonna back up, also what Margaret said about collaboration with men. I think that's very, very important, and I think that women also have to work with their male allies, because there were some females who were not allies, like the woman who betrayed the Eritrean woman sitting on the plane and was responsible for her getting raped and tortured. There are male allies who have a lot of power in religious communities, in traditional communities, and I think we have to work with them and see them as our allies.
Thank
Also
you.
in the United States.
Yes, please, please. Whoever wants, please.
I just want to add education. That's the key. Because I train lawyers in a master's degree level. I teach gender studies. And it's not until that point that no lawyer has been trained with gender perspective. They've never seen it in high school, never seen it in school, never seen it in any previous training. So this kind of education help us to understand not only gender perspective, but also the male perspective too, because they're also affected by this, situation. So education in this area,
As Amanda, we could have learned when we were young. Thank you, yes.
I wanted to add one
Yes.
thing, because you mentioned one policy change for women to be able to have access to justice. Implement digital courts, because everybody has a phone, okay? So they should be able to go to court to fight for their rights, using their phone. Because a lot of time, traveling is difficult for them, but we can bring justice to them using their phone.
Thank you
Digital
so
courts.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Move this into consent. Thank you. So let's permit me now to gather the very final threads into a forward-leaning closure for you. Just remember, what we built here will not stay here as I opened up. Our summary will travel to every mission and every agency. Let them hear our attention. Let them know we are measuring progress by what reaches the woman who needs it most. Let them grasp the concept that we are not waiting for permission to be equal. The house is on fire, like I said before. We need water, but we have laws with memory, budgets that can be awakened, judges who will not turn away, lawyers who will not be quiet, scholars who will not flatter the past, defenders who will not retreat, and communities such as this one that will not be patient with the unacceptable. Let us work to get the water and let it reach us patiently, awaiting the ladies here first and everywhere else in this world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the panel, for this wonderful panel discussion. I would like to just acknowledge and recognize my colleague Víquez. She's our UN representative, and she's the person behind this panel discussion. So I would like to thank you.
And appreciations to our expert panelists on board this morning. The team that we chose today was the priority working team of this Commission on the Status of Women 17th session. And I agree with everyone here that we need a holistic approach to make sure that the gender equality is upheld in every corner of the world. And I wish everybody an amazing 2 weeks of CSW. This is the time to be present. This is the time to be meaningfully active at the UN, at Church Center, engaging with different stakeholders to make sure that our voices are heard. Thank you so much.